So
Just help.
I'm in the city tomorrow. We are at the farmers market at 9 o'clock. So come there, just next to your house.
No, I just moved out of the city into the
Oh, yeah.
Belmont area.
You said Belmont. Sorry. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So
here for another week, 10 days. So we'll catch up. Rohit Vishnu is there. Good. So Bharat should catch up, and Rohit and all, yeah. And Shirish Netke is there, of course. Hi, Shirish. Good.
Hey guys.
Satyavrat, how are you doing?
We should probably get something together while you're here.
Yes, let's do that.
Okay.
Hey guys, don't be shy. Turn on your cameras. We haven't seen each other for 40 years.
Yeah. Everybody put on their cameras. And take off your emoji filters. Guys, I think we should get started. Saurabh, what do you think?
Yeah, so Khushro is just giving the control to Satyavrat also.
Okay.
So that then he can share his screen, and he's going to turn on recording.
Okay.
I have to turn on recording? Sorry?
No, I think do that. Let's see.
It is on.
Or he'll probably ask you to do that. No, it is being recorded now.
It is on.
It is being recorded. He has to give control to you also. I have.
Sharing is not turned on yet.
Okay.
For sure, sharing is not turned on yet.
Yeah, because he's not made you the host yet. Can I
Sap, you have to make him.
I have to make him the co-host. Very well. Okay. I just did that.
Yeah, you are now the host.
Okay.
So you can make him the co-host. Then he can share. Yeah.
Well, I just did that, but make co-host now. Make host. It doesn't seem to work. I made him co-host and I made him host. Oh, okay, yeah. Yes.
All right.
SVI, you are the host now.
Okay, I think we're good to go.
Yeah, good to go.
All right, let me begin with a quick introduction. So you guys, everybody knows SV for 40 years. I just want to give a little bit of perspective on this. First of all, cybersecurity is a big deal, as all of us know. And within the cybersecurity space, Satya Gupta is a big deal, which a lot of people don't know about. What I will say about his background, he's the pioneer of what is known as zero trust runtime model, and I can let him kind of get into the technical, let's say, specifications of what that means. But what I can give you from a business point of view is there are three things which let's say a CISO or a security officer worries about today. One is, and Satyavat, you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. One of them is ransomware attacks. The other is zero data vulnerabilities, and the third is social engineering, which is basically insider threats. And SV's model kind of addresses all of these, and it's what could be called a game changer in the area, and he can describe that in more detail. The reason I say Satyavat is a big deal is because he's got an approach on this, which he has pioneered over the last few years, and had a lot of success with. So let me wrap up with just a few important numbers, which you guys need to keep in mind. 25 years in embedded systems, network security systems architecture, which makes him pretty much a behemoth in the area. 40 patents, and I guess the most non-trivial part of it is about $150 million raised in funding, which in Silicon Valley means that if you haven't invested in SV, you're an idiot in the investor circle. So with that brief intro, let me go ahead and let SV speak.
SV, before that, let me request everyone to turn off their mics. You can have your cameras on. And SV, just make me co-host so that I can switch off their mics if I see anybody else on. And would you like to take questions as you go along or at the end?
Either way is fine, Saurabh. If sometimes it helps to get your question answered right away.
Let's take the questions right away, and if they become too much, we can sort of control them.
All right, sounds good. So Guys, it's a great pleasure to be talking to you guys all after 40 years and all. For a while, I thought, until Basant asked that question on the WhatsApp group, what time is the call? I thought I might be the only one in the audience out there, other than Saurav and Kushru, who are obligated to be there, and Shirish. But thank you all for taking the time to come and talk, to be here and having a good discussion. Looking forward to a good discussion. So, and my good friend Rajiv Kapuria keeps on calling us Kholus. So, I kind of try to include a lot more material out here. Tell me if I'm going too slow or too fast and all that. I'll be able to pick up the pace on that. And, hopefully that will not put you to sleep and all. But I can't say the same thing about me because I've been fighting a cold and cough. So, if I fall off, a little nudge from Saurabh will wake me up again, guys. All right. So, the title of this talk is Trust Intelligence. Everybody in the security space keeps talking about threat intelligence. The dominant technologies, EDRs, are all about threat intelligence. It's all about knowing every attacker's every move and being able to sort of predict, what the attacker is going to do, how to be able to stop the attacks. CrowdStrike, one of the leaders in this space, advertises that they can stop attacks in 36 minutes. And now, all thanks to their AI, they're claiming that they can actually stop attacks in 6 minutes. But considering that a ransomware attack can debilitate you in about 3 seconds, that's still a lifetime. Even if it's 6 minutes, it's still a lifetime. The big benefit of trust intelligence is that it actually results in a zero dwell time for the attacker. So there is no gap between, the attacker's intent doesn't succeed at all. So, one of the first thing that comes to mind is what is called a cyber attack kill chain. So typically an attacker is looking to infiltrate your infrastructure, either through exploiting a vulnerability or using some leveraging some stolen credential. And as Shirish mentioned, social engineering, phishing, and all are good mechanisms of leverage of extracting credential. But every day the National Vulnerability Database admits about 100 odd new vulnerabilities. Many of them, almost like half of them, are vulnerabilities that allow malicious code to execute on your machine. So those kind of attacks are called vulnerabilities are called remote code execution vulnerabilities. That means the vulnerability is such that the attacker can insert remote code and cause their code to run in your application's context and all. So getting initial infiltration is a big deal, but soon after that, what the attacker does after getting into the infrastructure is to perform the defense evasion steps, which is basically disable or blindside EDR or any other security control that you have. Then the next thing is to be able to achieve persistence, being able to connect back to their command control center so that they can actually extract data and actually send the data back. But then the next step is weaponizing the particular workload on which they've been infiltrated. So if the goal is to perform ransomware, then they will disable shadow copies so that you cannot recover from your backups and all, essentially. Then they will start exfiltrating the data, any useful data that they can actually do a double extortion on you. So just in case you decide you're not going to pay ransom, they'll actually hold this threat of making this personally identifiable information, PII, public. So it will kind of shame you into paying the money and all that kind of thing. And then finally, they will try to perform a lateral movement to make sure that, that they can inflict as much damage and make you pay as much as they can on when they actually hit you. And then finally, when it's time to ring their bell out there, then it takes milliseconds for the ransomware to actually detonate, and then pretty soon it gets replaced. Your screens get replaced with the ransomware demand and all. So this is a kill chain. It's kind of this is like no matter what the pieces of code that people use for persistence or weaponization or exfiltration, those can keep changing. But the Lego pieces of an attack are these 6-7 stages. There are a little bit more of those stages and all. If you look at MITRE, there'll be 14 stages, but this is the effective stages essentially of the attack. Here's actually a pretty interesting interview, and I'll send this deck out so people will have all these links. But this guy that you see sitting out here, he's known as a king of the ransomware gang called Babuk. So what he says out here is, he in this interview, he is pretty candid about it, but he says, he loves these remote code execution vulnerabilities, and 100 of them pop up every day pretty much. So in an organization that doesn't patch or doesn't patch fast enough, there is, he has an open invitation in there, and especially when it comes to these firewalls and type applications. Those firewalls are present in every infrastructure. So, if you find a vulnerability in any of those infrastructures, the guy is in. Expect a visit from Babuk pretty much, or some of his cohorts. These guys are organized in gangs. They call the initial infiltration gangs and things like those. But he also says out here he has tried buying, credentials from these pastebin on the dark web. But he prefers RCEs because those give him free access, and he doesn't have to pay anybody anything for those stolen credentials. If we, a colleague of mine who I work with in UMass Amherst, Professor Shinoy, he's an IIT Mumbai guy. Several years our junior. He and I did a bunch of dissection of all the vulnerabilities and all. And then we actually followed what the attackers are doing essentially. So those attackers who target vulnerable processes or, RCE attacks, according to this guy Babuk, their goal is to take some malicious data, specially crafted malicious data. It turns, the application turns it into code. And and that code basically ends up doing one of several things. It can create new code or libraries on your machine. It can launch new processes and can launch what are called fileless attacks, or it can inject into adjacent processes that are running on your workload, or it can inject and start new threads in a current process that it has infiltrated, and many other things. I don't want to go into the details of it, but this is the model that Babuk and his cohorts actually follow. And so there are the difference out here is that the top, attacks out here are on compiled applications, but he has a way of being able to infiltrate into these bytecode applications or JIT applications, as they call it. These are the applications that are written Java and .NET and all. So this is very interesting because, you can send some innocent looking data into these bytecode or JIT applications, and it'll turn it into SQL artifacts and, OS command artifacts and things like those. But we'll dig in more into this as we go along. So there are two classical approaches of cybersecurity. One approach, the conventional approach that the EDRs follow, is called the default allow deny on threat approach. What this means is they let the code keep on running until they detect a threat. And for that, we'll talk about in a moment. The other approach is a little bit more thorough approach is default deny, allow on trust. If I don't recognize this piece of code, I'm not going to let it run. So as clearly, on the EDR approach, the focus is on threats, and they have these AI, ML, they'll brag about all kinds of AI and ML techniques and all that they've done to capture every possible conceivable threat. But somehow the threat actors keep coming up with something new that escapes the attention of these AI, ML. And this is why attacks keep on succeeding, and the number of attacks is growing every day. As opposed to that, in this other approach, the focus is on trust. Where we explicitly establish the provenance, meaning, if this code claims that it is coming from Microsoft, then we establish the fact that it is actually from Microsoft, and it is exactly the same code that Microsoft released and all. So that is what we mean by provenance and integrity. And sometimes you might have noticed that, you download Adobe and a copy of McAfee, Site Finder and all, something like that gets installed on your machine. You may or may not want that piece of code, so that trust also involves the concept of authorization. If it's not authorized code, we won't let it run. So the sources of telemetry for the EDR are system logs, where basically the logs track all kinds of file process creation and network activity and all that, or user behavior. What time did somebody log in, and they'll kind of create a profile for every user. Network traffic, who logged in where and where did they go, what ports they were using, and so on and so forth. But in this other case, in the other approach, the trust-based approach, you look at the command line arguments and check if the provenance, integrity, and authorization of the executables and libraries that are loading is completely kosher. Otherwise, you'll stop the application. So what that does is basically stops any malware, whether it is yesterday, today, tomorrow's malware, everything will get stopped in one stroke. We don't even have to care about understanding the malware signature and things like that. And sometimes these processes will spawn children processes, like Apache will spawn a bash shell, for instance, on a Linux machine, but Nginx, which is another web server, will not. So we have the ability to detect when the child process that is spawned is actually being spawned by the application or the result of an action that the attacker is taking, essentially. And as the application creates new threads, we can actually check, is this code that is being run by the new thread, is it coming from the application or is it from the attacker? Same thing about control flow integrity violations. This is a very clever attack where, the attacker is not even sending any new code. They're just stitching together bits and pieces of code from the existing application and turning it into a piece of malicious code. It's a little bit like a newspaper ransom note where you can take a little bit of information from Article 1, take another one from Article 2, stitch it all together, and it becomes a totally different, it reads totally differently. So that's what control flow integrity violation attacks are. And we'll show you an example here of that. And then malicious data morphing to malicious code. Many JIT applications will do that. They'll take, something that looks innocent looking content, some base 64 encoded content. And it turns out that it is some sort of a very, very vicious SQL query and all that is under the hoods. So the way the EDR operates, the conventional, the default allow, deny on threat approach works is the very first thing that they'll do before they'll let the application run, they'll check for malware signatures. So they all maintain a signature database, and if they'll check if this piece of code that's about to run matches any known malware signature. Usually it is not the case, so we proceed to the next one, which is a heuristic check. They'll take the executable, and Windows executables follow a format called PE, portable executable format. So they'll examine that and look at all the API calls and things like those that are inside those inside the code, and look for dangerous patterns that they have seen attackers use in the past. Then as the application is running, they start looking at anomalous changes to system log, user behavior, all the good stuff that we talked about in the telemetry in the previous slide. Now this telemetry is collected using a ELAM, early launch anti-malware. It's really a kernel driver. So it basically instruments the kernel. And if anything goes wrong in that particular driver, we've seen what happened to CrowdStrike a few days ago, and I'll dig into that a little bit more. But this is really, it's a double-edged sword. It actually makes that information, that telemetry available very quickly and efficiently. But it also is a very dangerous thing. Things go south, they can go really, really south here. But as you can see here, all the system log, user behavior and all is all very imprecise and circumstantial information, which is completely replete with false positives. At this point, it's a little bit like this proverbial, 5 blind men and the elephant. Nothing against the blind people, with my disclaimer there. But, as those blind people actually have not enough context out there, somebody thinks, the elephant tusk is a spear. Somebody thinks, their ears are fans, and somebody thinks their trunk is a wall, and so on and so forth, right? So, for that reason, the telemetry has to be post-processed in a security operations center. There's a bunch of humans or some more AI ML sitting out there trying to refine the attacks decision and trying to figure out whether it is real or not. Because the cost of pulling the plug on that particular application is the user could be complaining about business discontinuity. Their business processes could get affected, and they'll be held to pay. So EDRs are very cautious. They never will try to stop the process. It's your own employees who will end up trying to stop the process and all. So, and they don't provide enough conclusive evidence and all. So let's look at, what are some of the EDR stage 1 checks and all. So CrowdStrike has this sandbox that they use to be able to qualify pieces of code. I submitted this piece of code called lskd.exe. It was a Windows executable. I submitted it, and it turns out, the CrowdStrike sandbox told me it is an ambiguous result. There's a 35% chance that in some antivirus engines detected it and others didn't. And some, the ones that detected it labeled it as some malware called Win Malicious Confidence 70% and all. And then, they did their own analysis on the code, and they found with low confidence there, something like this malware that was present in their machine. So, the problem here is that you can well imagine, when I get something like this, how do I know what to do next? It's very difficult to figure out, should I let it run? Should I not? So this is not really very helpful. And then, people have been blindsiding EDRs for a very long time. One of the techniques that people apply is something called an indirect system call. So normally what happens is when applications or malware is making these system calls into the kernel, the EDR is sitting there sniffing those system calls. And it can actually, when it instrument these functions, it can actually catch all of these system calls and then analyze and see whether it is a good one or a bad one kind of thing, right? So when there's a user trying to allocate some malicious code here trying to allocate virtual memory, it can see that some new code is being created and all. But when the attacker uses some other functionality, including by using the system call, as you can see here, instead of making a call to this particular API, the guy actually called up this particular primitive way of being able to call the system call, and that completely blindsides the EDR. The EDR sees nothing. It just falls right through from the application space into the kernel without the EDR looking at anything. So, a lot of attackers have made, EDRs a favorite punching bag. There's, if you Google around, and there are links in this email out. When I send this out, you'll see links out here. There'll be, the people have made a habit of, trying to see how to, in the defense evasion stage in the early kill chain that we talked about. This is how people achieve, malware actors, threat actors, make it a business of being able to do defense evasion using these techniques and all. So, this is, now we jump into a little bit on the CrowdStrike incident that happened last week. So everybody's seen these blue screens of death. What was missing out here, what may not have been focused on, was this blue screen kind of errored out there saying critical process died. And so just so you know what that critical process is, it was the system critical process, which is, as you can see here, it is running the kernel of a Windows machine and all. So this kernel is the progenitor of pretty much all the processes that will be generated after this kernel has loaded up. If this kernel process dies, then you first of all you'll end up with a blue screen, and no other user process will spawn. So there's no hope of being able to recover from the system, guys. So everybody who needs to recover from there has to boot their system in safe mode, so that these CrowdStrike drivers and all don't get loaded up in that sequence. So but Microsoft has also this is a little snippet of my own code being analyzed by Microsoft. So when you submit, you are if you do not have a Microsoft signature on your code, they will not allow it to load into the into their kernel and all, right? So they are a little bit more complicit than they are making out in this whole episode. So they'll perform these various checks that you can see here, including manual review, scanning, validation, and all. So now that they claim that, hey, we don't know anything at all, but if they did a scanning and validation of just turned on a machine on which this code, the CrowdStrike driver was applied, they would have gotten the same result that United, and Delta and all these other airlines had. So it's, a little bit cleverness on their part to sort of deny any culpability out here, but I feel they are also culpable. But the most interesting part out here is this crash dump that happened. So somebody posted the crash dump, as you can see here. The CrowdStrike agent, there's a function. This is machine code, and we don't have the symbols. but the function that was located at this address took in two parameters, one of them being 009C out here. And then, the system process attempted to dereference that value at 9C, which is a prohibited value because this is this is an area of the kernel you should not be reading and all. And it immediately, the operating system crashed, because of a read access error and all. So this is an unhandled exception and nothing, there's no, exception handler tied to something like this. So it immediately crashes essentially. So those of you who remember or who are current in your, reading assembly and all, you'll appreciate what's going on out here. But now those who not you will see that, it is basically an unhandled exception that was caused by CrowdStrike's driver essentially. So this is the story out here. CrowdStrike has been spinning by saying, hey, our driver, our code analysis and all did not catch it and blah, blah, blah. But, the very first machine that you install it and run it on, it'll all blue screen pretty much right away and all. So the reality is nobody tested it. And it went out, not just that, but they also applied this patch on 8.5 million machines worldwide before you could say, boo, those machines are all blue screened and all. So, so this is the real story behind CrowdStrike. So I'm going to take a pause out here. Any questions here? I know, Saurabh, you mentioned that there'll be a bunch of questions around this.
So, go ahead, Bharat.
No, go ahead, Suresh.
Satya, how could have this CrowdStrike fiasco been avoided? Was it simply a matter of QA check on the code before it was released, or is it a breakdown of process, or is it a human oversight? In the normal course of code release, could this have been avoided, or if they followed best practices?
Right. So a bunch of things, both at at CrowdStrike's end and both at the customer's end. On the CrowdStrike end, Shirish, nobody, what normally happens is CrowdStrike is getting all these code signatures and things like those. Those are benign content and all data. It's not code. But it turns out that people didn't realize that in this particular update that CrowdStrike was pushing, it was not just data. It was not signatures of various malware that they had, that they wanted to update into their endpoints and all kind of thing, right? But it's also some code that they were updating their driver, which is always very, very dangerous. It requires a bunch of scrutiny, and which they never did. So they can keep spinning on, on the crowd, the tool and all that kind of thing. But the reality is when there's a code, if you look at the content that was being pushed, there was a .sys file. That's a driver file. So when you have something like that, it begs you to sort of do a much more deeper analysis than they actually ended up doing. Now let's talk about something else that they could have done. Typically what we do is when we push an update automatically, we go and test it on 1 or 2 machines, and then we make sure that that particular machine comes up and registers back with our SaaS servers. So if it doesn't register, then we know not to push anymore and all that kind of thing, right? That the damage is only restricted to that one machine where we attempted to push. So you don't compound the problem by pushing it on every machine helter-skelter kind of thing. And then the thing that you could have done at the other end is, on the customer's end is that, same logic out there. When you get new code, you don't just simply go and apply it everywhere. It's a good idea to go and do some sanity testing. This is what people call change management practices. So when you get a new code, especially when you get a patch from, let's say, Nginx or Apache or any other application that you're using, you kind of take it into your staging area and all in your data center and then test it out before you roll it out in a big way. So, but in this particular case, the customer, because it is all bundled inside and it's hard to tell what's inside that package, the code that is being written out there, there's not enough visibility. So, tools that can actually shine, that can help you understand what's inside this patch or this package out there, those kind of tools will help a lot. So people need to be able to deploy those kind of tools on their end and make sure that they don't go helter-skelter and just believe, CrowdStrike, just because CrowdStrike is a $100 billion company, that I should trust CrowdStrike and apply whatever they tell us blindly. There's Shirish, there's statistics that 40% of patches that are deployed are actually bad patches, and you nothing will tell you more than the log4j patch where where the code had to be applied 4 times before the log4j solution actually got patched properly. 4 patches.
I'm just curious, is there a liability issue for CrowdStrike from this? Because looks like they're the ones who messed up.
Oh, definitely. I'm hearing reports in the newspapers that people are getting ready to sue them because a typical incident, costs a security incident might have costed Delta Airlines like $4 or $5 million, but this one is costing them $5.4 billion. So I'm not sure the Delta management is going to let them get away with it. And then there's always these hearings in in the Senate. The last time SolarWinds happened, the SolarWinds CEO, the CrowdStrike CEO, and the Microsoft CEO actually were hauled up in front of the Senate and insulted there for many, many days. So the beating is yet to come here.
So SV, the normal practice in deploying software is that people all often take a precaution of not updating software as and when it comes in because it's because of things like this, of being, let's say, bad patches. In the case of security, on the other hand, the CISO always says like implement it as soon as it comes in because it's probably avoiding vulnerabilities. And that's kind of the best practice in the industry. So what you're saying is even the security guys have what do you call bad patches in there, which so can do more harm than good.
No, definitely. And, if you have the ability to protect, like the zero trust code stuff that I'm going to be talking next, that other logic, the other approach that I'm talking about, that can prevent pieces of code, even if they're not patched, from being abused. Remember this guy, Vazavaka, that Russian gangster that we talked about? He's looking for RC vulnerabilities. But what if, the intent of that guy is to run some malicious code on your system, right? That will further his agenda and collect all kinds of PII information from your system and exfiltrate it. If that can be disabled, then you've effectively achieved patching. And this is one of the things that I'll talk about what we do in our product.
And
So,
one quick thing, CrowdStrike was SaaS service, right? So don't they upgrade automatically and you have no choice to control it?
Yeah, that's the problem. They upgraded it, and pushed a new kernel driver. That kernel driver caused that machine to go, blue screen of death. It could not connect anywhere to the network after that. So it's a chicken and egg situation. Now it cannot connect to the network and receive new updates anymore.
So everyone has no choice, really. I mean, if you are using that service, right?
Yeah. If you're using that service, you'll have to go to that particular machine, turn on the safe mode manually, upgrade, pull out the CS agent, delete that file, and then go back into the manually back into your normal mode, and then boot up and then connect again with the CS, with the CrowdStrike SaaS service, and then you'll get patched. So you have to do a truck roll to every machine, essentially. And then 8.5 million machines involved.
SV, I'm dating myself, but this was exactly the same issue. I don't know if you remember in 2007 when McAfee did the same thing. They took out a patch which created a BSOD around the globe, and we had to. We had to do the, as you said, manually safe mode, delete file, reboot, and then do that, which is very difficult to do. And I'm not adding 2+2, but CrowdStrike product management team is built up with a lot of ex-McAfee guys. So, that's it's basically a McAfee team which
wasn't
runs
this
that.
guy George Kurtz the guy involved in that too?
Yes, in both
CEO?
cases. It was George Kurtz involved in both cases.
Okay, that's a coincidence.
George is not ex-McAfee as far as I was. Ex-McAfee. He is okay. So then, that's what, okay. So my 2+2 is maybe right. It's actually 4. So
it is.
Yeah. Okay.
Just one other thing that, so whenever Microsoft applies a patch, I work in this industrial environment where the security patches are automatically applied. So it may improve the security, but it usually ends up breaking something or the other because it looks at legitimate activity that was going on, like our application, and it now it flags it as a malicious thing and then kills it. So a lot of collateral damage from all these security patches, and I don't know if there's any way Microsoft can or any other company can stop this because they're focused on just the security part of it, and then they're not really looking at what else is going on before.
Yeah, yeah. So you typically the advice is you apply that patch in your own small little staging area, and you see whether it's going to work for you or not. If it doesn't work, lots of people don't apply. There are I don't want to name this company, but it's a very large food chain in the US. And I bet in the last month you've eaten out there, or at least a significant number. We are all very health conscious people, so we don't necessarily go there. But that, those people actually end up, you have a staging area in which you'll definitely apply those changes, and then you'll proceed.
Well, I mean, that's a pretty standard practice on our side here in the government side here in DC. I mean, that's what we do all the time. I mean, we apply to a staging and then test it out or pilot it or small pilots or something like that. I'm surprised that this was not done. I mean, that's a very standard practice in release management.
It's not under your control in this particular case, right? The CrowdStrike agent itself goes and connects to the CrowdStrike server and obtains the copy and updates itself automatically. You're probably
because it's a SaaS service, right? Because this software
Correct.
is a service platform. Okay.
Correct.
You have no choice. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it happens under the hood. It's for them to be able to do this. If they do it, that's good. Typically what we do, we also have a SaaS service. What we do is we make sure we start with one server, right? And then on that server, we make sure after the upgrade, does it register back and it's speaking correctly to us in all the, all the handshake that we do before we go start rolling it on in bulk.
Yeah, that would be a standard practice, I would think, but I'm surprised.
Yeah, SP. Other thing is the same patch was released for Apple and Linux also, but it did not affect them. Why did it affect only Windows or Microsoft?
So Bharat, it's not the same patch. Look at this function here, the CS agent here. There's some function at offset E35A1, which takes these two parameters, and this one parameter was a null pointer here. It was pointing to some zero location in memory kind of thing, right? So that code may be working totally differently in Mac and other places, so that no guarantee the same code will work the same way in another, hardware. So these are very specific to Windows 10 machines essentially. These kernel drivers are very tied to the specific versions of hardware. That's the problem.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Sound like a bunch of questions here. I'll move on. So this is the contrasting approach to the EDR approach. What we start out by doing is we'll establish the provenance of every piece of code. A typical machine will have 250,000 of those things that can execute as code. So fortunately, Microsoft marks a lot of its code with a certificate. So even if the file is even a little bit tampered, the certificate will get violated and all. So then the next thing we check is also Microsoft also measures or also creates a database called the system file checker database, where the signature of all the system files, not Word and other things like Excel and things like those, but system files, those that are necessary for the system to work and all. So those signatures are maintained in a database that are also present on your machine. So you can cross-check the validity of system files against that. Then we have what we call a trusted compiler. A lot of applications like the IIS server, when it hosts .NET applications, will actually compile the code on the fly on the machine itself, right? So there's no vendor involved here. So this is called the trusted compiler execution. We actually check every process that's compiling the code, whether it's been infected or not. Then we maintain a very large repository of trust of of packages, like for instance we refer to Apache and Nginx and Oracle and this and that. All of those, we maintain the checksums of those databases. So we have what we call a trust hub of third-party code that we maintain. Same thing for enterprise, but this is where when the enterprise releases its own code, like they use artifactories like JFrog or something like that, we can connect from there and create the checksums from their artifactory and house it into the company's own internal database and all. Because we run our code, our SaaS service is run in Snowflake, which is, as you all know, a data lake essentially. So it can have bazillion amounts of data in it, including this checksum data here. Then sometimes, sysadmin, this is a very highly suspect practice, but someone said earlier, people like convenience a little bit more than security. So sometimes the sysadmin, instead of logging their code into these repositories, they will go and drop their code files directly on those machines. So we offer the ability for the sysadmin to go and mark their code as safe that they recognize. But then any code that does not get recognized by the software packages that are installed on your machine. So for instance, if I know Microsoft Word is installed on your machine, then I know all the files that are associated with Microsoft Word, because this Blade 1D tells me these are the files that will be associated with Microsoft Word. I now know the integrity of every piece of code, those 2000 files that come with the Microsoft Word installation on your machine. And we know the integrity of all of those information. So anything that's left over that is not, that whose integrity has not been found, we'll have to send to our reputation gateway partner. We work closely with a company called Reversing Labs. We send them the checksum and they'll tell us. They have the world's largest repository of malware. Every day, 450,000 new pieces of malware get released in the ether, guys. So Reversing Labs' claim to fame is that they actually have a very substantial portion of these reputation checks and all. So now we are scraping at the bottom to try and figure out, whether this is a malware or not. Then if Reversing Lab knows nothing about that piece of code, because 450,000 of them coming out every day, it's humanly impossible for them to track every piece of malware. So if you still have some residual stuff left after reputation checks, we also provide a sandbox where you can analyze that piece of code and get some sense of whether this code is good or bad. So most people, our defense customers basically say, I'm not going to run anything that is not whose provenance cannot be established. If it is not done by provenance, then I'm not going to let it run and all. So this is a very central concept. We take, when we first install our product on our customer, we go through this check from the top, the provenance checks, and then we keep falling down. Ultimately, the sandbox analysis doesn't waffle. It will deliver a result. It will tell you something or the other about that piece of code, right? So this process can take maybe like 3 days, 4 days, who knows how, depending on how many malicious files or unknown file that you have on your system. Ideally speaking, you should have none, because when you get the IT to build a box and tell them, hey, I want a RHEL machine with Apache server on it, the IT guy will go and build from the latest copies out there. And so everything will have a provenance. It can be traced back to Red Hat and to apache.org. So there should be zero unknown file. But the fact is that, once you leave the machine out on the internet, it will get attacked and it will get bad code on it. So this is a process that we establish. We call it the audit period. In the audit period, the customer basically gets to find out a little bit more about your code. Bharat, you had a question? Okay, so this is almost like a know your code, kind of a thing situation here. It's the KYC of code essentially, and this is what's going on here. So once go ahead.
Yeah, mistake. So is your whole process more of white versus black concept, that you are allowing only, whereas EDR is a blacklist or whitelist concept?
Yeah.
Okay.
We follow this practice, Bharat, that I mentioned, default, deny, allow on trust. If I don't have trust of that piece of code, I won't let it run.
So you allow only whitelist to happen, whereas other people do it more from a blacklist perspective. They're removing bad things. You are not allowing anything which is till it's white.
Yeah, because we know Microsoft and people who we are allowing, whose code we are going to allow to execute, they are in the business of producing software. It may be vulnerable, but it's not malware. Right? So the EDR guys follow the default allow, deny on threat. Their ability to detect malicious code is premised on the fact that they can detect threats. If they can't detect a threat, they let it continue running, which is very bad because, the threat actor, all the threat actor has to do is to create something clever that their AI and ML, CrowdStrike's AI and ML is not trained on, and it'll sail right through. But here there's no danger.
I have a question. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is Gopal. So essentially, is it not equivalent to making a rule saying once you get a computer at work, you should not be allowed to install any software?
Correct. In some ways, yes. But, that's not reality either, right? Gopal, people will install, to do their job, they may need some tools and things like those. So it's not just a one-time thing, but you have to keep making sure that what you are installing is highly provenance code, essentially, that you trust, that you can trust.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Right. So, but this is, this is the starting point, like we were talking about it earlier, Microsoft produces plenty of bad code, that gets hacked every patch Tuesday, which is the second Tuesday of the month. There's a whole bunch of updates that keep coming in from Microsoft, right? There's no reason to suspect that they make wonderful code that'll never get hacked and all that kind of thing, right? So what the attacker is doing is they basically, if the attacker has found a vulnerability in Microsoft code, they'll send some highly crafted data that the IPS, the intrusion prevention system, the web application firewall, and your own firewalls, and all these other solutions that you might have, security system, that they are blindsided because they don't. All these guys work on the signature basis, right? If they find something, if the threat is totally novel, they'll not detect any of these things. So they are behaving on yesterday's patterns, essentially, is what they're doing and all. But at the end of the day, what the attacker is trying to do is he's trying to take control of the application, some thread inside your application or some process inside your application, so that the train tracks here start diverging and start serving the attacker's intent. Right? This transition is the key. This is what my company actually ends up looking at, being able to spot that what the code that is about to execute now in this new thread or this new process or this new child is no longer pristine code that you actually thought you were going to allow. And many of these attacks, when they are fileless attacks, that means you can start a PowerShell code with some sort of a command string which is base64 encoded. There's no file out there, nothing for CrowdStrike to evaluate at all. Right? Because there is no file and CrowdStrike cannot evaluate that thing. These things have a very high success rate of attack, of being of victimizing you. So all that the attacker has to do is to end up with a fileless command using something called a lolbin attack, and now they're able to do something like this, what you see here. As long as the application is executing, continuing to execute the application's own code, whatever the developer actually released out there, no harm would come to it. It's not furthering the agenda of the bad guy there. Because the bad guy wants to exfiltrate data and then he wants to run ransomware commands and all, which is not part of Microsoft or any other legitimate application that you have on your machine to execute. So this little transition here is the key to success. And and it's a very binary situation. Either the code that is being executed came from this guy, the application developer, or it came from somebody else. And so there's no waffling involved out here. There's no false positives that are involved out here. We detect it with a very, very high accuracy. And that, is done using these 5 engines that we have, the provenance enforcement engine, which makes sure that, before the code executes, it executes only code that we have trusted previously. And when that doesn't happen, our custom protection action allows the customer to launch anything that they feel like, any other action that they want Some, as you were saying earlier, somebody said earlier, I'm sure, not recall any who asked that question, but I may just say all I want guys is to be informed. Don't bother stopping it, right? That's one behavior pattern where you don't want business continuity, but some people will say, I don't like any foreign code executing, so I'm going to stop it. Right? So you have the levers in your hand, essentially. You decide what you want to do. So this application control engine makes sure that the processes that have already started are not yielding child processes that are potentially have been hijacked, which are under the control of the attacker. And so all of these other engines will go into one or two in a little bit more greater depth out there, so you can see what's going on. But I won't drill through all of them. But let's drill through one control flow integrity engine, which is basically this is a very clever attack. There's a function called get adder info, which is used to resolve IP addresses and get the DNS names and all of the server. So if I give you the address www.cnn.com, and if I wanted to know what was the IP address of CNN.com, I would use this particular function. So in other words, a very heavily used function here. So when that function executes, the library, the glibc library executes these functions in a certain order. This particular function ended up creating a buffer in memory of 2048 bytes in the expectation that the DNS server, when it sends its result back, it'll actually populate the data here so that it can pass it on to the vulnerable app, to this particular function, which will pass on to the application. So now everything was all going nicely and all. This was a vulnerable version of glibc library. Ultimately, there was a socket call back to the DNS server after all the functions that needed to execute. This DNS server, which had been corrupted, ended up sending more than 2048 bytes of data back. Because it was a malicious DNS server, it was under no obligation to sort of send only 2048 bytes, which was the requirement in the RFC. But then this particular function, was the vulnerable function, it didn't bother to check that the data that came in was more than 2048 bytes. So it egregiously ended up copying all of this data, and in the process trampled these very important locations in memory. These locations are very important because once this particular function was done, it needs to be able to tell, hey, who goes then executes next. So normally this guy would have stuffed the address of this other function out here in the return pointer, right? But now because it has been attacked out here, what happens is that return pointer pointed to where the attacker's code lived essentially in memory. Right? So instead of underscore res getting computed to be returned, control to be returned here, it got returned to the bad actor code. And now you've lost control. So at this point in time, because we were not executing based on what the application said it would be doing, instead we jumped off into the weeds and start doing it. Our engine will detect something like that and it'll start invoking whatever protection action you tied to that particular incident. This is a pretty dense slide, and so I'm going to pause here if there are any questions here. No. Okay. So this is
no questions. No question, SV. Person like me, I'm struggling. Okay, Okay, to understand what you're speaking.
The question I had was this, that if somebody, if the malicious malware has the same name as this, someone overwrites this file name, would that be a problem? Or the one which is executing, how does it know that
so this
is the
library, this library, when it gets loaded first in memory, in the very beginning, and the time when the process is getting started, this glibc library would be getting loaded in memory. We check its pristineness. So as soon as that gets pristine, it passes that check, it goes into some read and execute regions of memory where you have no ability to write anymore. So once it's loaded in memory as pristine, there's no way to change the code in that library. The operating system provides that guarantee.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, Tangi, I said overuse. I'm sorry, apologize.
So, SV, just to address Rangi's point here, it may be a more broader question is, knowing that this actually happens, how does a company set governance policies to mandate a check like this to take place? Because I think it's pretty clear that this is not what management knows about. It's one of those things which, as a company, you are very vulnerable. You are vulnerable to, and it's an unknown, I think, in a lot of management's mind right now.
Right.
What can management as a point of governance do as first of all, to check that this hasn't happened? Secondly, hold people responsible and have some kind of, what you may call it, instrumentation, that if something like this happens, the right people are held responsible for it. So Sanjeev, that might address your question or your thought process. Go ahead, SV.
Indeed. All right. So, what most people will tell, based on, the current set of control, people say you have to patch as soon as a critical vulnerability is announced by, let's say, in this particular case, the glibc vulnerability, right? It had a, it had a criticality score of 10 out of 10. So most people, the reaction would be go patch it right away. Don't lose any sleep because Vaka is waiting for you in the weeds out there for you guys, right? So, but that is not practical, right? And somebody said, I got to manage my business. It's more important for me to make revenue than to keep stopping my production line and keep updating code, because that's all I'll end up doing. Because then like 100 patches coming every day. So, what we are working with, with some cyber insurance companies and all. We are basically saying, you don't need to patch here, all these critical vulnerabilities in. When you feel that there's enough body of new functionality, then go ahead and patch. There's no need to do this patching on like a immediate basis and all, because we act as a compensating vulnerability. So from a compliance perspective, Shirish, you can say that, if I can show you that this is out of the 100 vulnerabilities, if I can block 98% of those vulnerabilities, you can go back to the compliance agencies, like whoever you are doing, let's say, a SOC 2 audit with and all, and you can show that you meet those vulnerability deployment, vulnerability criteria, those security controls, without actually having to patch.
Is this included in the standard SOC 2? We go through SOC 2 all the time, and there's the ISO, there's NIST, everybody comes up with their stuff. Does this find is the answer to implement controls which correspond to this? Because they don't exist right now. I don't see these controls.
No, they do. We actually just went through a SOC 2 audit ourselves, and we were, we used a company. It's a very famous company in DC area that many people will know, and called A-Line, and they completely bought into this control.
Okay, but
they need evidence,
probably can discuss that offline. I'd be interested in having this control, saying how it relates to SOC 2 controls.
Yeah. So
this question about, go ahead.
Go ahead.
So how much of this has got to do with making your code open source? I mean, if you make something open source, you're kind of letting people find all the vulnerabilities and exploit them, right? So how much of this is caused by having open source code that people can look at and find out the weaknesses?
So we are completely in runtime here, as you can tell here, right? Until this particular functionality was exercised, we won't detect it. So it's not just something that would actually run through some code statically and be able to come and tell you that there's a vulnerability in your code and all. That's why you need these controls running in your production environment. Just doing static analysis doesn't necessarily help, because these are all very complicated pieces of tricks that the attacker plays and all. If, for instance, if the DNS server were not sending these 2048 bytes, more than 2048 bytes, you would not have seen anything like this here. But can you guarantee that the DNS server will send more than 2048 bytes? If you've got very strong QA teams and all, you can potentially do something like that, right? But most people don't. There's too much cyclomatic complexity in code to be able to do something like this. So what we advocate is, deploy these, this particular product in your production workloads, and it basically keeps it safe, irrespective of the fact that there's a vulnerability. It won't get abused. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
The malwares, they are coming with the patches, your own patches, or they're coming from some vendor patches?
So there's a difference out here. We are not talking about malware here. We are talking about vulnerable code. In this particular case, it was some glibc library that was vulnerable, right?
Right.
But what the attacker wants to do is this is where they'll drop malware. This is the first time the malware begins to execute. This is not malware here. Does that make sense?
Right.
The
Okay.
malware does, to answer your question, malware does come bundled often with the other pieces of code, and there are various tricks people follow. You just go up to a website, 30-40% of websites that you end up going with actually end up dropping some bloatware and often malware on your machine. This is how you have all these unknown files sitting on your machine, essentially.
Right, but when a company like Apple or something, they have their software in a production environment, there's no downloads there, right? Or there could be downloads.
Let's think about you as a user, right? You deployed some server on your environment and all, right? Now,
Right.
let's say or even let's take your own laptop and all, right? Apple produced this nice laptop, then give it to you, right? Now you go at home and start browsing some websites and all, right? There's no control like Apple will exercise on that, right? You are free to go to whatever website you want to go to. Right? When you connect to some of these sites, they'll connect through advertisement sharing pools and things like those. They'll make these AJAX call to all these other websites that you don't even know anything at all about.
Right, but if I'm running a custom application for a client, a government client, there is not my personal laptop. They are in some data center. Those are servers or something, right?
Right.
Or it's a SaaS service. It could be it could be just Snowflake or Databricks.
Correct.
So can these reach over there also?
Sure. What happened here was, if you think about, let's take an example of Bank of America here, right? Bank of America servers are open 24/7. Anybody can connect to Bank of America server, right?
Right.
So I can drop, and let me actually walk you through this example, and we'll come back to you to answer your question. So imagine I have an application in which I, and on a login page, I ask the user to enter their username and password. And so, when this request reaches your server, like the one that you are describing, what happens inside the server is that there's an HTTP request being received from your user. What we do is we'll peel off the HTTP request and we'll see, are there any interpreter specific syntax in it? And I'm going to be giving you an example of the SQL interpreter. So in this particular case, I'll be watching for SQL artifacts out here, right? So if let's say I try to be hacking and I change my name from Satya, I enter instead of Satya, I entered Satya or 1 is equal to 1 dash dash, right? So if the application is vulnerable, if the business logic of your application is vulnerable, it'll say maybe this guy's name is Satya or 1 is equal to 1 dash dash, right? In that case, what will happen is it'll fold in that Satya or 1 is equal to 1 dash dash into the SQL statement that it is producing. And it'll project it towards the SQL interpreter and all, right? So what will happen is that because the application was vulnerable, it actually took this Satya or 1 is equal to 1 dash dash. And as we all know, this dash dash terminates a SQL statement, right? Everything to the right of it becomes useless. And because 1 is equal to 1, my, this query will succeed and I'll get logged in. Right? So suddenly I've changed the nature of your application. I know how to bypass your application's login defenses and all. Right. Now, this is a very simplistic example. I can just use it to log in out here. But imagine I could drop in a whole bunch of files out here and say, go drop these files on your server's disk. Right.
Wow. Okay.
So I could actually drop malware on your system without you knowing anything at all about it, without you connecting anywhere yourself. Right. In the server's case, I can use these kind of techniques because they're open 24/7 for business. Right. I can use a vulnerability to do some crazy stuff like this one here.
Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah. So this is how, again, if you look at it, what's happening is the attacker is being able to influence the outcome. The SQL statement that is being produced is under the control of the attacker because I am the one who changed my name from Satya to Satya or 1 is equal to 1 dash dash. So I can change it to anything I want. I can make your machine execute any code that I want. And that's a classical example of a threat actor having taken over.
Yeah.
Right now, my code is running and now not your code. All right. So here are some use cases. Some people like to compare us against an EDR. So there is a there's tools called Safe Breach and similar. What they do is they'll drop a piece of malware on your. They ask you to deposit a piece of malware, not really malware, but a piece of code that connects back to their command control center. From their command control center, they will start behaving like a malicious actor. They'll start sending various types of attacks and all. So Versex, code, basically our own protection, we call it the Versex Security Platform, VSP for short. VSP detected 100% of those 862 attempts that the BAS tool made on trying to infiltrate. And then they had, out of those 862, they had, in addition to that, they had 55 other attacks that included those malware, these living off the land kind of attacks, meaning PowerShell followed by some sort of a command string, a fileless command string, as opposed to a file. So a file can be analyzed by CrowdStrike, but the command string, they totally get blindsided by that. So look at what happened to CrowdStrike. Their score dropped from 100 to, from 82, that they could recognize 82 of those malware that this BAS tool, that basically that attack simulator tool had put. They were able to not recognize 18% of those files. And their efficacy dropped dramatically when it came to these PowerShell type attacks and all. Another use case is this know your code, know your, just like KYC in those banks make you sign up for KYC kind of thing, right? So what we do here, we help you analyze, the provenance of your code. How much of your code is fully trusted? That means that we can trace its provenance. It came from Microsoft or Red Hat or Oracle or wherever that your package is drawn from. And the other code that could not be recognized, we've analyzed it and we figured out, some of the code could be trusted through the analysis that we performed. It got a score of between 76 and 99, but some of them got a very low score, 0 to 25 also, right? So this is the kind of code you don't want to run. And there's a little selector bar out here which allows you to select how much risk you are willing to eat, essentially. If you decide you're a very high critical application and all that, you'd probably decide, I don't want to run anything that doesn't have full trust. Or you might say, like somebody mentioned out here that, business continuity is important. They'll say, I'll run full trust and elevated trust, but that's it. I'm not willing to take a risk of this much. So it completely depends on your appetite. And, the trust score will keep growing as we kind of keep on finding the provenance of more and more code and start putting more and more analysis on it. The trust score posture of your system will grow. It started out at 73, it will go up to 100 potentially, if we can eliminate all the bad files out there. This is one use case.
SV, I'm still sort of struggling with how do you address the social engineering aspect of it with this? Is that later on, or is that a part of this trusted code thing?
No. So I kind of went through this here. So there is this attacker with stolen credentials here. Right? What is it that they're going to do? They start these interactive processes like RDP or SSH, terminals and things like those, and then they start doing the same thing that this malicious code does. They'll drop new code or start new processes on your machine, right? You pretty much own that machine at that point in time. So the effect of phishing is that you've been able to log into that particular machine.
No. So I have a different sort of thought process. So social engineering is basically insider threats. That means somebody from the inside may either, with intention or unintentionally look at something. More often than not, if it's intentional, then you catch it based on their behavior. But if it's unintentional, how do you arrest that in its tracks? It's not clear to me.
Right. So Shirish, what happens is that everything is locked down. This is like a production system that's locked down. Nobody's allowed to touch this thing here. Right? If you want to execute something, you just like in a locker or a bank kind of thing, right? You have to write an ECO, and then you are allowed to basically perform whatever action that somebody signed off on that ECO, right? Otherwise, the system is locked down. As soon as we see that it's executing anything outside that lockdown envelope, we'll stop it. Because remember, I told you we have control over every child process, every process that's starting out. I can tell you, is this allowed or not? And the profile is locked down, essentially. Are you familiar with SE Linux by any chance?
No.
Okay, so we can take this offline, Shirish, and I'll explain that to you in more detail. It's basically a mechanism of locking down your system, essentially.
Okay.
So even the sysadmin cannot execute anything at that point unless they've performed some change management, like an ECO kind of thing. They registered it. The system now allows for that little surgically, whatever it is being stated in that ECO, that will be allowed to run and nothing else. These are all, if you look at from a compliance perspective, there's traceability in all of this stuff, right? Somebody files a ECO, it then goes through those change management controls, and now you're allowed to perform a certain. It's an access control, AC kind of category of controls in the NIST 853 R4.
Okay. There's actually a question from B. Srinivas. Sure, you want to read that out? Or I can read it out for him. He said that Southwest was least affected by CrowdStrike, and there are benefits in not embracing the latest technology. So if Microsoft didn't stop support for Windows XP, we would have stayed there and be happy. So I don't know if
the only
comment on that.
In the lacuna, I can tell you one thing here, that you take here, let me just show you people who think you can escape out of that one is they've got another guest coming out there because I don't have that data here, but if you take a Windows 2003 box out here, I thought I had this. It has that particular Windows 2003 box. If you take a native one, go download from Microsoft's image out there, it has 1,350 vulnerabilities on it that come for free. And almost 80% of those vulnerabilities have exploit code posted on the internet. So if you think you are not getting hacked, you got some serious problems out here. One of the orders that we are working with the federal government right now is they are very worried about a particular project I can't name. They have 250 data centers with almost 800 Windows 2008 servers in them. Windows 2008 servers were sunset somewhere in 2021 kind of time frame. There's no support coming from Microsoft on that. Guess what? These guys' biggest problem is, how do I protect against those attacks? Because their vulnerabilities are constantly being discovered on Windows 2008 that they have no patches coming for. And they cannot upgrade their Windows 2008 servers because of some issues with their Java applications and all. They'll break. So they're caught between a rock and a hard place out there at that point, Shirish. And,
Even United Healthcare got hacked a couple of months ago, and they lost billions of dollars. We had really had serious issues. I mean, it was taken over by a hacker, and they only released it after paying millions and millions.
Yeah. A lot of these companies don't even advertise, but one of the big four that just paid $50 million ransom for an attack that they don't advertise. But we just
this was well advertised. United Healthcare was well advertised. All the providers, we had to pay $1 billion or something to doctors and hospitals because it stopped payments of all their services. Our claims department just stopped working, so we had to pay.
You are referring to Chance Software acquisition that they had, right? That they actually took over Concur or Chance and all, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, seems like you are familiar with that. Yeah. Change. It's called Change Healthcare. Change Healthcare.
Yeah. They were a 40-year-old company that United acquired, and then they had very old system that they didn't patch.
Right. Yeah, it was a big deal. It was really a big deal. And we paid it to one of the hackers, and he didn't. I mean, he was a lead hacker, and he didn't pay to the small time hackers who actually hacked it. So it was a big thing.
They all came out of the woodwork and all then, right?
Right.
SV, there is also a question by Sundar Rajan in the chat box.
Okay.
I'll read it for you. If connection to internet is the root cause, then how the mobile phones, which are connected most of the time, do not experience hacking in both magnitude and frequency?
Okay, so there are two kinds of, you have to remember when you have a personal laptop, you go out to the internet, right? It's an outbound kind of connectivity there on a personal laptop. But on a server, it's the opposite. Like for instance, Bank of America, I gave that example of Bank of America, right? That Bank of America is open for business 24/7. Even when the employees of Bank of America are gone back home, Bank of America servers accepting connections all the time. So when you have the door open, people will stroll into that door. But when you have a door that you control, you go to the, various websites and various locations and all, right? You get, your exposure is only when you go out there. Does that make sense? It may just look like they're, in both cases, you're looking at a computer, but a personal endpoint and a server workload are very, very different beasts out there, guys.
Yeah, I
So
think this is corporate level hacking, right? I mean, not individual mobile app, right?
Yeah,
Well,
we
that's where the
don't
money
we
is.
don't do that personal laptop stuff at all, because people realize that if you get hacked and all, what's the attacker going to do? They're going to ask for $1,000 or something like that. Maybe you'll tell them go pound sand. What are they
Yeah,
going to
I mean,
steal from your machine? Yeah.
See, I have a question, follow up
Yes.
on my question.
Mhm.
See, you say mobile, you just go to internet, whatever you want to go to, and therefore it is different from laptop. That's what I understood from your answer.
No, not different from laptop, different from servers.
Servers.
Mobile and
corporate.
laptops are the same endpoint devices.
Okay. But then I think the mobile apps get updated very frequently all the time. You don't have much control on all those things. Am I right? So that means internet, whatever malware has to come through the internet into my mobile, it keep coming.
Right.
As I understand, SV is saying that it is not worth their while to hack you because you are an individual. How much
Okay.
will you pay?
Right.
Is that right, SV? Is that
Yeah,
what you?
correct. I mean, if I can get $50 million out of Deloitte, but I can't get $50 million out of you unless you confirm that, in which case I'm coming after you.
50 million या 50 भी नहीं मिलेगा.
Exactly.
The cost benefit.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, United Healthcare, they were like, they had to stop like billions of dollars of payments, hundreds of billions of dollars of providers, healthcare providers payments. It was a huge system.
Yes, I have a more technical question.
Yeah.
You made two statements. One was your software will stop something executing under certain conditions. Number two statement you made was monitoring jumps.
Mm-hmm.
Both of these require some kind of kernel access for your software or something, right?
No,
or no?
no, they don't actually. No. So, for the first one, when we actually, let's say, you have a create thread kind of a thing, right? So there is, there's both user space code. Like for instance, in Windows, you have an NT. Are you familiar with the NT system calls and all?
I'm more familiar with Linux than NT, but sure, go ahead.
Let's talk Linux, right? So let's say you are performing a, like a DL sim, you're trying to load something, into memory and all, right? So you might call a DL open kind of system call, right? So I can actually intercept the calls to DL open, and I can look at its argument. I can tell in user space what happened out there, right? I can do it both at the kernel and in user space.
Okay. So I as a user am blocking this thing from running.
Yes.
Whatever I find. And then how much overhead does your software take if it's monitoring everything I'm running and monitoring everything for jumps?
So usually the answer we have is a very small number, but here's a very large, here's a server that was running at 88% CPU utilization. You never run servers like that, right? Our software took 9.4% CPU.
Sorry, how much?
9.4, but this is proportional. So mostly people will run, servers at about 4 or 5, 50 or 55% CPU utilization, in which case, the numbers are less than 5% here.
Okay. And then one more, again, a slight technical question. When I'm dynamically creating containers and stuff, using Kubernetes or something, how does your software get put on those? So it has to be something when I set it up that every time I create a container or every time in general, how do you handle containers and stuff?
Right. So we haven't released the product yet of the container, but this is what we are doing internally in our lab, right? So when you go to a container, there's an image registry that you maintain, right?
Yeah.
So what happens is and there's a Helm chart or Terraform or some sort of a CI/CD application that you'll also use to deploy your container, right? So there's like the equivalent of a deployment.yaml file that you have and all, right? Which will actually talk about every runtime, container runtime, and also, how the thing is all held together and all. So what we do is when you deploy, we add a little step out there where when you deploy, we'll go and alter your Helm chart, for instance, right?
Okay.
Okay. You got the idea there, right?
Yeah, I got the idea. Yeah. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Good work.
Yeah. So just a couple of other slides out here. Now, I know we've gone horrendously over time and all, but if anybody can stay on, I can talk about it. So what we do is we actually take we allow the customer to ingest from their CMDB database, their configuration management database, and it'll actually segment the infrastructure into applications and, into data centers and applications and all. And so you can select any one application and you can see the trust score and know your software and all that kind of good stuff, from that segment and all. So it allows you to pin, to pick and choose what you want to be able to see. And then, this is the vulnerability compensation stuff that we were talking about earlier. Normally, when you use a product like Tenable or Qualys and all, it'll tell you 317 critical vulnerability, 375 high, and so on and so forth. But our own analysis will tell you internally, we have a microservice that will do that in analysis right away. It'll tell you out of those 317 to 89 vulnerabilities were protected by Versec without you doing anything. So in other words, if you look at the red, little pattern out here, this heat map here, if you didn't have Versec, you'd be patching from here to here, right? But if you had Versec, you'd be patching only this little sliver out here, essentially. Right? So this is, Shirish, to your point, this is that compensating control that we talked about before.
And it's compensating control without an overhead associated with it is what you're
that's
saying.
right. That's right.
Because all controls come with overheads. And if you, I need to understand this better. If you are able to manage the overhead associated with the control, then it's significantly value add.
Yeah. Because, we work with the Visa right now, Shirish, and one of the things that they told us is that they spend $50,000 per vulnerability, and they're coming fast and furious every day, as you know, right? The National Vulnerability Database registers almost 80 or 85 vulnerabilities a day. So, they spend gobs of money on trying to create these controls and all. But now if you have something like this, you don't need to do anything at all. In many cases, you don't have to do anything. The number of times you have to go out there is very small.
Okay.
So if I were to answer that question here, Murli, you asked, we cannot install any software except with IT admin. Yeah, that's very important. That's how we build software control on trust, essentially. And when IT installs something, it goes through our change management practices, and our trust hubs get updated with that code. And this is, by the way, this is not about laptops. This is all about server workloads and all.
Yeah, at the corporate level, right?
Yeah. Because again, we realize that, if just not to demean anybody, but let's say I'm a hacker, and if I have a choice to go to your home or the business next door, maybe it's some multinational company out there, I'll probably end up going to the multinational company, right? Because, there's more to be gained out there.
So, SV, one of the things which
we've landed up transferring. So if somebody hacks you and puts in valid numbers for some piece of code, so you now are carrying the responsibility for all of us.
So valid numbers, can you explain that a little bit more?
I mean, like, for example, I add a piece of software to your database of valid, good software, right? Somehow, if I can hack your database, then now I suddenly get access to all your customers because now they believe that this is trusted software.
Again, we protect our own databases. We eat our own dog food also first, right? So
yeah, I know, but it's worrisome. Now, if you think about it from a hacker point of view, it's much better for the hacker to spend his energy attacking you.
Yes, of course.
So you have taken essentially all the individual attention into you.
Yeah, definitely. We were, it's interesting that you raised that point. On the last RSA, what's that guy, Chris, who kind of stopped that Jeep on the highway, right? So this was a bathroom conversation we were having with him. A guy was peeing at the same time in the same bathroom out there with us out there, right? So he basically said, if I know if Versec is protecting me, I'll go somewhere else because, there's easier fish to fry out there in the ocean out there.
Okay.
Yeah.
SV, you understood this. You answered this question earlier from Bharat. But was there a difference between, let's say, in the CrowdStrike thing, between the vulnerability of Unix machines versus Windows machines? Was there one more vulnerable than the others?
Not really. I mean, it's directly proportional to the population. It's really the humans that make the mistake out there, right? There's more code exposure to Windows than to Linux, and that's changing now. But they're equally as suspect, Shirish. But the reason we don't hear about any of that stuff is because that piece of code was very different. So if you write code now, you probably have statements out there if Windows or if Linux or if Mac kind of statements out there, right? The code in the other block may or may not be vulnerable at all, Shirish.
Okay.
It just so turned out that this code was vulnerable in there, in Windows. And in kernel drivers, Shirish, in particular, there are dependencies on the hardware. There's a DLL called HAL.DLL, hardware abstraction layer. And it's very different for Windows 2003 versus Windows 2008 versus Windows 2012 and so on.
Okay.
This particular CrowdStrike vulnerability was in Windows 10 machines only.
I see.
SV, most of it, of course, went overhead, but I remember that one of the first few slides that you showed, you made a comment that one of the first things that they do when they attack you is to also ensure that your backup data is also gone.
Correct. Yeah.
So how is that? Why is that backup data not well protected, and is it not offline also?
So sort of there are these snapshots that Microsoft and all these other companies have these little shadow volumes. So as let's say you are changing something in the disk, they keep a image, the copy of that image in memory, right? So that if you immediately, and there are like 4 copies that they keep back to back to back. So and that is meant to be able to revert back in case you screw up. You can go back and get the previous copy back. Right, but what these guys will do is they there's a shadow volume that which is basically like a replica of your disk. If you think you may think of the disk as a bunch of files and all, but it's also a bunch of pointers, right? Then here's this little sector that points to that other sector, so it's a bunch of linked lists and all. So what they do is they'll make 4 copies of those linked lists and make sure that that you have you can revert back to your previous. So sometimes if you notice when you shut your machine down and you have a Windows Word document open and you start it again, the previous version comes back up and all, right, kind of thing, right? So
I get what you're saying. Yeah.
So those copies are maintained in memory for agility and persistence purpose, because this thing keeps on changing again and again and again. Every minute it can keep changing, right?
Yeah, so they've changed the address location of your file so that you can't find where it is.
Yeah. So the file, think of the disk as being a bunch of sectors of data, but they are interconnected. If a file has, let's say, 100 pieces of information in it, the first piece and the second piece are connected through this linked list, essentially. If I break those links, the data is still there on the disk, but it just gobbledygook now, essentially.
Okay.
You're muted.
Any more questions, guys?
Srinivas, you had a question, you were saying something.
I think for most people, this went way overhead. So there are very few questions.
Yeah, I post this.
SV, can you put this, what you said, like summarize it in layman's terms of what should be a takeaway for, let's say, a layperson on this who's not technically inclined, who's not involved in the nuts and bolts of security. From a business point of view, what should be the important takeaway for them?
So, like I said, there were two strategies. Now, one is default, allow, deny on threat. That there's a class of products that implement that technology. And then there's another class of products that implement this technology called default, deny, allow on trust. Right. So the takeaway for me, at least, for somebody who's security conscious, is that the strategy of default, deny, allow on trust is a whole lot more stable and much more likely to save you from trouble, essentially. And it's still in the past, that has not been embraced by people because it has been not been user friendly. But that's where a lot of our stuff is targeted at, that we made it totally user friendly. You don't have to lift an eyeball, or a finger to be able to make it work.
I think it hasn't been pursued because it's of the overhead involved. It's I don't know, and I guess you're addressing that, the overhead in one way. So yeah, user friendliness is one thing, but people in security don't really care that much about user friendliness. They do care about the overhead and the ability to compromise business continuity and everything else.
You'll be surprised. People will deploy shitty, security solutions just because it's easy to maintain. It's like a checkbox. I have this thing deployed.
Yeah.
Well, let's face it, gang, like if it's our own home, it's default deny, right?
Yeah.
So which major company?
Let into your house? Only people you trust, right? People are not just allowed to come in and then you say, are they stealing from me?
Yeah.
Which major company?
I think that's a question.
No, I was just trying to figure out which, like Sentinel, which one has which policy? Yours is a unique one, right? The one solutions are available in marketplace like CrowdStrike are different, right? They follow that whitelist policy, was Bharat was saying.
Well, we follow the whitelist policy. What they do is they let any new piece of code run until it actually exhibits bad behavior. So like Rohit was saying, you let somebody in and then suddenly you realize that that guy is like, he pulls a gun on you or something like that, right? But it's too late. You might be dead by that time.
Okay. So, right at the beginning, sorry, go ahead.
No. So I was just going to say that you said working with government agencies. So you are present in DC also? Because I'm in DC and we always look for new solutions. I'm part of United Healthcare. So I'm trying to see if this is something we can demo to our clients also here.
Definitely. We have, a team of, folks out there in the DC area. We have, some people who kind of represent us as well. There's a small team out there. I'll, my email address here. I'll just put it out here. So just ping me after this and I'll be happy to connect with you.
Yeah, I work on a lot of different opportunities. RFPs and all that. So we can demo it to our, like we have Veteran Affairs is one of our big client, and CMS, Center for Medicare, HHS, Health and Human Services. So some of the really, really huge clients. So we could demo it to them. So
yeah, definitely.
interesting.
Yeah, love to connect with you on that.
All right, sounds good.
Satya, you're not suggesting that you don't go after the patching and so on, right? We got to do that anyway, even with what you're proposing. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So, you know, many patches are security fixes, but other patches are functionality fixes and all, right? So you should absolutely take them. But again, you know, it's up to you. You know, we were talking to this Oracle CISO, and the CISO there basically said most of his customers are 3 years behind. They don't take patches because, you know, it's just too disruptive to keep patching Oracle in particular. It's a beast. So it's a pragmatism comes into the picture here.
So, SV, something you mentioned right in the beginning about the half an hour response time versus the few seconds response time. So, are you saying that the second response time is probably more optimal? Is that what your solution does? Does it respond much by being proactive and doing KYS, I guess KYC, KYS approach on that?
Right.
Does that make that response time? Does it cut down your ability to respond better?
No, in many ways, you know, if I were to, let's see, let me just share. You know, these attackers are getting smarter and smarter. So if you look at, you know, there's this backup information I have here. There are these pieces of malware or ransomware. There's a link out here, Shirish. It takes less than, you know, a second for the ransomware to explode. Right. So if you are going to respond in 6 minutes to something that will attack and blow you up in 0.5 seconds, you might as well not even bother, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, so that's why prevention is more important than response.
Correct.
Okay.
That's where allow listing and all is very important. The trust is very important. I'll never let something like this even execute even once. Even one instruction of that code will not execute.
So you said your response time is so fast. How does that, I mean, is it your architecture, which is like some kind of, I mean, you're using a fast architecture or something?
So what we do is we basically will stop the process as it's about to execute. So what happens in the OS is that, you know, when you click on some application out there, the kernel basically creates memory space in the memory and then starts loading files one by one into that space, right? So we intercept that process. We basically say this file blah 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 word.exe is loading up in you know, in memory. Let me check its integrity first. If we find that it is not.
It works when you're loading a particular executable software, not during runtime, right?
So once it loads in memory, it goes into regions of memory in that process space that the kernel created, in a region which has read and execute privileges, but no write privileges. So then once that code has been loaded, it cannot change.
Right.
The OS offers that guarantee.
Right. Okay.
And then after that, you know, like I showed you in this other slide here, it's a matter of keeping it safe at runtime at that point, right? This slide here. How do I make sure that, you know, whenever a new process is getting spawned out of this parent process, right? Or a new thread is getting spawned, I have to make sure that that code is also still executing the process, the code that is loaded up in legitimately in memory. Right? This little transition, you know, is very important.
Right. Okay, so check it right then that when it's supposed to start to spawn new process that it's executing the some basically known something. Provenient.
So like this attacker can actually create something. Microsoft Windows allows basically a functionality called create remote thread. So this guy can create a thread inside my process memory and start executing some code. So when create remote thread call happens, I go and check, hey, where's the pointer to the address of where the thread will start executing from?
Right.
Right? If that thread happens to be in the address space of legitimately loaded code, I'll let it run.
Right.
As you said, there are about 450,000 new codes that come out there on the net every day. So
Right.
then the whole library would be probably 500 million to 1 billion strong by now. How do you go through that library to see whether a particular something that is trying to enter you is already known?
So,
How much
sorry,
time does it take to do that check?
We don't do any of that check. We just simply say, if I don't trust this piece of code, I'm not going to let it run.
Yeah, no, but those who maintain this library, what use is it?
They're like screwed basically, you know, and this is why CrowdStrike has to update every day, sometimes 15 times a day. Look at this here.
And how many people would be doing this for a living? Because, and is there no, I mean, is law enforcement totally unable to handle and detect these guys? Why is that?
Yeah,
So?
these guys live in various countries anywhere kind of thing, right? It's easy to go drop in something into Bank of America server, for instance.
Yeah, they live in Russia and I don't know, Nigeria, China, I think, right?
Totally out of control.
But otherwise, if they were in a country that you could do something about, then you could locate them and put them behind prison.
You could. You could, you know, look at this. There is this gangs of people. They're like businesses, sort of. They're called initial access broker, and they're basically, you know, they'll sell you, you know, access to, you know, various people, various companies. You say, you name them, you know, you can say that, hey, I want, you know, IBM's, you know, login, and they'll send you, you know, you know, a whole bunch of logins from IBM for a price, of course.
And most of these governments will not cooperate. I mean, like Russia will not cooperate, or China won't, or Nigeria. There's no cooperation. But you said that don't you have to search like 500 million entries to make sure you are trusted? So would take some time, right? I mean,
it's a one-time problem to begin with. It's like a KYC kind of thing, right? You know, when you actually, when I showed you this use case here, you know, if you as a customer decide that I'm going to take my chances, right? And I don't want to wait around kind of thing, right? Then you can just keep on going the way you are going. But if you want to be able to be sure of what you are doing out there and you want to get reputation and all, you'll spend the 2 or 3 days that it takes to be able to go through this analysis.
Right. But 500 million the initial load time is going to be significant, right?
No. We are not loading anything. We are basically going and actually checking if that particular file belongs to a package. And 99% of the files are belong to some package like Red Hat or Windows or Oracle or
those are API checks, right? Those are APIs provided by
the ones that I'm
companies.
bothered about are these unknown ones, right? Why the hell are they sitting on my machine? Right? If you have, you know, if I told you have 20 files sitting on your machine that, you know, they didn't come out of any packages, you'd be worried. The next thing you'll probably tell me is, hey, tell me where they came from, or tell me a little bit more about them, right? That's what curiosity gets piqued.
But is the name written, the company vendor name written on a particular software, or I mean, you still have to know?
Yeah, in many cases, like for instance, you know, if I have a file, this publisher stuff, you know, files, that PE file that I told you about, will actually tell you who the publisher is actually. Assuming, you know, vendors good enough like Microsoft and all, they'll sign their code. We sign our code, right? I just showed you in the CrowdStrike thing.
But can these hackers fake that also, or no?
No, some of them go, you know, are pretty smart. They'll go and get their code signed. Right. So, but then it doesn't mean that, you know, you can actually, you know, you have to honor that code. This is why, you know, you have to be able to, this is why we have this authorization, you know, is this piece of code may have a provenance associated with it. That means there's a certificate tied on that code. But am I going to run it? Should I run it? That's another totally different decision out there, right?
Yeah, but if it is coming from Red Hat, I mean, you would assume that this is perfect. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, right?
Correct.
But that if they somehow fake that, if they somehow
no, that's not easy to fake. The certificate, once it's issued by Red Hat, those certificates will become void and very quickly. It's not possible to fake this certificate.
Okay. So the certificate tells you whether that particular software is authentic or not, right?
Yes, it's not been tampered. It's like a supply chain kind of a thing, right? That is not been tampered. But there are plenty of companies like open source code that don't sign their code and all, right? There's like, all kinds of libraries that we use, log4j and all that kind of thing. They won't sign their code.
So these certificates are electronic, so something,
they are
right?
buried inside there. And, when you get a certificate reference like a 1024 bytes and all, your machine will go and verify against, the public domain information against those, wherever that certificate has been issued by. So you'll go to talk to verifying, hey, is this certificate which is presenting these creds out there, these, these keys, they do actually belong to, Microsoft or IBM or Red Hat or whatever. And the answer will come back, yes, no. It's a little bit like a passport. Think of it like a passport.
Right. Yeah, I mean, but passport can be fake too, right? So some companies.
It can.
Rarely, yeah.
Yeah, but nowadays, that's getting incredibly difficult, as you know.
Right. Okay, sorry, I've taken a lot of time here.
No problem. I put my phone and my email address in the chat, so we can connect offline.
Yeah, we have a group of architects here from United Healthcare in DC, which we serve government clients. So I'm gonna try to see if we can get that presented to them and see we can include that in our solutions for the government clients.
Right. We work with many healthcare entities and all, with a company called Presidio or WWT, and also you might be able to find something common there.
Is it FedRAMP solution? I mean, like, if you are working in the defense, then it's probably FedRAMP, right?
No, right now we don't have FedRAMP, and we are working on that. So, from a certification perspective, it works, that you're working on it kind of thing. But we have talked to and FISMA and all in the past and all.
Yeah. But if it's in the process, yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Yes.
What's the name of your company, you said?
It's called VIRSEC, VIRSEC.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, guys, let's see each other one final time. And SV, if you get any business, then there is a referral fee. Don't forget.
Yes, Saurabh, I owe you that.
You paid in Bitcoin to Saurabh's account.
Yes, and also
we could use some salespeople if you want some sales commission.
Yeah.
Good, and good to see you, SV. I'm seeing you after 82.
Yeah, you should.
No, of course, we met in Delhi for a while until you finally left for the US.
Right, yeah.
And last time I remember meeting you was on Frankfurt Airport in 83, 84. I don't know if you remember, but I
vaguely recall that, yeah. I was very sick.
You were going home with you were transitioning back to India with some computers and
yes.
Right? Are you based in India, or have you moved back to US?
No, I moved back to the US. We didn't have a good outcome and I moved back in 98, I think.
Where do you live?
I live in the Bay Area, Dublin, East Bay Area.
Okay, you're on the West Coast. Yeah, you're on the West Coast. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'll be probably visiting Bay Area soon. My niece is over there, is having a child, so probably will be visiting soon. Next couple of months, 2-3 months.
Yeah. We meet pretty frequently, right, Girish?
Yeah, I think we met just last week.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It'll be probably in October, November, maybe. Yeah.
That was good.
Yeah, let us know when you're here.
Yeah, we'll love to. Yeah, thanks. I'm obviously taking the trip to Acadia also, Park, with Dilip. I don't know if you guys are coming.
Yeah, we lived
I
a
know.
long time in that area, so I love Arcadia, so we probably go.
How are you coming to? I mean, Dilip is or has organized a trip in October.
Yeah.